Chapter 3 Things Left Unsaid. Zuko blamed Uncle Iroh. Most of his problems could usually be traced back to one of his uncle's ideas. This one was no different. 6 months earlier, leaders from all 4 nations had gathered to discuss rebuilding efforts. The war was over. The world was healing. But healing wasn't the same thing as trust. Peace between governments is easy, Iroh had said during one meeting. Peace between people takes longer. The room had fallen silent. The nations spent 100 years learning to fear one another. Perhaps now they should learn from one another instead. The idea spread quickly. Exchange programs, teachers, artists, scholars, students from every nation would travel and live among different cultures. The council loved it. The Avatar loved it. Everyone loved it. Everyone except Zuko. Not because he disliked the idea. Because he found himself becoming strangely invested in one specific assignment. Katara. The original proposal had placed her in the Earth Kingdom, a respected academy near Ba Sing Se. It made perfect sense, which was probably why Zuko hated it immediately. He remembered staring at the document, then staring at it again, and again, until one advisor finally noticed. "Is there a problem, Your Majesty?" No, apparently there had been, because 20 minutes later he was somehow explaining why Katara's skills would be more valuable in the Fire Nation. Then he was defending the argument, then insisting on it, then refusing to let it go. Looking back, he still wasn't entirely sure why. All he knew was that when the final documents were signed, Katara was coming to the Fire Nation. Not Ba Sing Se. Not the Northern Water Tribe. The Fire Nation. His responsibility. For some reason, that had felt important. The problem was that it still felt important. Especially the day she arrived. Zuko remembered standing at the harbor waiting for her ship. Trying very hard to convince himself he wasn't waiting. He greeted important visitors all the time. This was normal. Entirely diplomatic. Nothing unusual about it. Then Katara stepped onto the dock. And every sensible thought immediately disappeared. The sea breeze tugged at her braid. Sunlight reflected off the ocean behind her. She looked older than the girl he'd traveled with during the war. Stronger, more confident, beautiful. The thought arrived instantly. Uninvited. Completely inconvenient. For one ridiculous second, the noise of the harbor faded away. There was only Katara. Then their eyes met, and something inside him settled unexpectedly. A feeling of relief. As though he'd been waiting for something without realizing it. Then Katara got close enough to speak. And immediately insulted him, which restored balance to the universe. The next part of the morning had been easier. Mostly because palace tours required less thinking. Katara complained about the size of the palace. The number of hallways. The fact that she had already gotten lost. Twice. Zuko enjoyed every second of it. Unfortunately. Later, Katara disappeared into a meeting with Fire Nation education officials. Zuko spent the next few hours in his own meetings, which he tolerated with varying levels of patience. Eventually, he escaped, and found himself standing near the meeting room. Not waiting, just nearby. There was a difference. At least that was what he told himself. The doors finally opened. Katara stepped out looking exhausted. "There you are," he said. Katara immediately narrowed her eyes. "Were you waiting for me?" "No, you were." "No, you absolutely were." Zuko ignored her. "How was the meeting?" Katara groaned. "If I see one more report, I might start another war." A laugh escaped him before he could stop it. "That bad?" "Worse." They began walking through the palace gardens. Katara exhaled. "The academy seems nice though." "Harmony Academy?" She nodded, then added, casually, "It's also surprisingly close to the capital." The comment caught him off guard. "Is it?" Katara gave him a look. "It is." Of course it was. The original academy hadn't been. The original location had been nearly 2 hours from the capital. Zuko had changed it, personally, twice. At the time he'd called it practical. The academy worked closely with government programs. Having the Southern Water Tribe representative nearby made sense. At least that was the explanation he'd given everyone else. The problem was that he wasn't entirely sure he believed it himself. Even now, because every time he tried to explain why he'd pushed so hard for that specific academy, he came up empty. All he knew was that the thought of Katara living far away from the capital had bothered him more than it should have. Katara looked ahead, unaware of his silence. "It seems like a good setup," she said. "I haven't seen it yet, but the officials made it sound nice." Zuko blinked. "Speaking of Harmony Academy," Zuko said. Katara looked suspicious immediately. "That's never a good way to start a sentence. The Summer Lantern Festival is tonight." She blinked. "The what?" "The biggest festival of the season. And you should come." Katara crossed her arms. "Why?" "Because you're here to experience Fire Nation culture." She narrowed her eyes. "That's your official answer." "It is. And the real answer?" Zuko smirked. I think it'll be entertaining. There it is. A servant later delivered a traditional Fire Nation outfit to Katara's room. Entirely for cultural reasons, obviously. When she appeared in the palace courtyard that evening, Zuko forgot how to breathe for a second. The crimson dress suited her far too well. Golden embroidery shimmered in the evening light. The rich Fire Nation colors somehow made her blue eyes appear even brighter. For one dangerous second, Zuko forgot every language he'd ever learned. The clothes fit. Brilliant. Absolutely brilliant. Years of diplomacy at work. Katara raised an eyebrow. They were expensive, weren't they? Maybe. His recovery was not improving. The festival transformed the city. Thousands of lanterns illuminated the streets. Music drifted through the air. Families crowded every marketplace. Children ran through the streets carrying glowing paper lanterns. Katara stared around in amazement. It's beautiful. For some reason, hearing her say that mattered more than it should have. The entire evening felt easier than it should have. They walked, talked, argued, laughed, like they always had, except not quite. Something felt different, and Zuko wasn't sure he liked how much he noticed it. Then the messenger arrived. The moment Zuko saw the officer approaching, he knew something was wrong. The man's expression gave it away immediately. Your Majesty. The officer leaned close. We've received another report. Zuko's stomach tightened. Not now, not tonight. I have to go, he said. Katara frowned. Everything okay? The concern in her voice surprised him. More than it should have. Just council business. It wasn't entirely a lie. She clearly didn't believe him. Smart. Very smart. Unfortunately, Zuko motioned toward a guard. He'll stay with you. Katara immediately crossed her arms. I don't need protection. I know. Then why am I getting protection? Because there are people who don't want peace. Because there are people who might see you as a symbol. Because the thought of something happening to you makes me uncomfortable in ways I'd rather not examine. Instead he said, it's standard procedure. Katara looked unconvinced. Zuko couldn't blame her. For a moment he considered staying. Just a little longer. 5 more minutes. 10. The meeting could wait. Except it couldn't. Because duty rarely cared about what he wanted. So he left. Even though every few steps he found himself glancing back. Just to make sure she was still there. Still safe. Still smiling beneath the lantern light. The meeting lasted hours. Long enough for the city to grow quiet. Long enough for the lanterns to disappear. Long enough for exhaustion to settle into his bones. The reports were worse than expected. Groups opposed to the peace were becoming organized. More confident. More dangerous. One name appeared repeatedly. The Ember Dawn Society. A group that wanted the old divisions restored. A group looking for symbols. Representatives. People who embodied unity. People like Katara. The thought sat heavily in his chest. By the time Zuko finally returned to the palace, most lights had been extinguished. Then he looked up. And froze. Katara stood on her balcony overlooking the city. Safe. Back at the palace. For reasons he preferred not to examine, some of the tension immediately left his shoulders. She noticed him. Then waved. A small gesture. Simple. Yet somehow it made him smile. A few minutes later, he found himself standing outside her room. Which was ridiculous. He knew it was ridiculous. Yet he knocked anyway. The door opened. Katara looked tired but awake. You should be asleep. She crossed her arms. I was about to say the same thing. A laugh escaped him, before he could stop it. I wanted to make sure you got back safely. The word slipped out before he could think. Katara blinked. You came up here just for that? Zuko immediately regretted everything. No. The lie sounded terrible, even to him. Katara smiled, and somehow that made it worse. Or maybe better. He wasn't entirely sure anymore. All he knew was that sleep was going to be impossible. Again.